All right, my name is Jacob Stork, and this is my History 122 with Dr. Ammons extra credit YouTube video. Today I will be covering the Great Depression, how it started, its effects on America, and what was done to try and fix it, and what ultimately brought the United States out of it. Starting out, I'm going to talk a little bit about the root causes of the Great Depression. In the 1920s, the economy couldn't keep up with the expansion that was happening. Rapid growth in the industrial sector, jobs, people were working, business was booming, and it was flourishing across the nation. The economy couldn't really keep up with it, and with the increased wages and a good economy, people continued to purchase products and services, which ultimately helped the economy to flourish even further. But banks started allowing people to buy on margins, which meant they could pay a certain percentage, which was usually 10 or 20%, and they could own entire shares of like stocks and stuff. So it sounds good on paper, but this creates inflation, and as everyone can now own large amounts of stocks, it creates inflation, and it creates a big bubble, and it's due to burst at any point. And in 1929, this bubble ultimately burst. It all comes crashing down. Stockbrokers lost confidence and began to sell off all of their stocks. In the days following the crash, people panicked and rushed to their banks to try and get their money back. These were called bank runs. But basically, the only problem with this is the banks no longer had that money to give out because it had all been invested. So people don't get their money back from the banks. Everything that they put in is gone. This leads to the creation of the FDIC, which I will cover later. But people expected President Herbert Hoover to do something about this problem. He had a more hands-off approach to the problem and believed that the market would correct itself and bring itself back to even and stabilize out, which it never would without government intervention with a loss that big. President Hoover did, however, authorize the building of the Hoover Dam, which was a massive project which put thousands to work in industrial jobs, concrete jobs, everything like that. And as the Depression continued, favorability of Hoover continued to decline, and the United States citizens took any chance they could to try and bash him, just basically blame him for anything that could have gone wrong. So small shanty towns that were more low-income people were dubbed Hoovervilles, which was a heavy shot at the president. His ratings were not very favorable. Public opinion on him was also diminished when the bonus army was denied their money. So during World War I, soldiers were guaranteed $1,000 in 1945, but the Depression was not anticipated, so they came to try and get their money early, and they came and actually marched to Washington, D.C., and they came to get their money that had been promised then rather than in 1945, and this was denied. Everything had changed, however, with the election of a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as FDR. He was a fresh face and had a plan to defeat the Depression, and he helped establish things like the FDIC, CCC, and WPA. And his goal was to defeat the Depression in the first 100 days of his presidency. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, took young single men, and they worked planting and building things to try and take care of the environment. The WPA, the Work Project Administration, was to create work for people. So basically anything they could do to try and put people to work and help them find jobs that were going to pay them well. And with this, people got their money and were able to send it back to their families and just keep enough to survive. Only a few, but dozens, if not hundreds, of programs were set in order to help people escape poverty. some people didn't like these programs. They were seen as socialistic, and they're promoting a welfare state because the government is paying for them to do stuff like that. But it ultimately helped America get out of the Great Depression. The New Deal was set into two pieces, the first New Deal and the second New Deal. The second New Deal brought about the Social Security Act, the Wagner Act, and the Fair Standards Act. So the Social Security Act, everyone knows what Social Security is. You pay into it, you pay into it, you pay into it, and you can get it back once you retire. The Wagner Act gave people the right to choose whether they wanted to join a union or not. So if you didn't want to join a union for whatever reason, you didn't have to, because before then it was everybody joins a union or nobody joins a union. And the Fair Standards Act established a set work day and a set work week, which was not something that they had before. So people could work an insane amount of hours, 7 days a week, and there was no problem with that. So this just helped people to get a little break from their work. Another problem that plagued the nation during the Great Depression was the Dust Bowl. And this was caused because over time, from the 1880s to the 1920s, when these lands were being settled, they had been overfarmed in the Midwest and the Great Plains, and it had destroyed the topsoil. It made it more susceptible to drought because it had all been plowed up, and it just destroyed it. So when drought came and there's nothing to hold this soil in place, then they can get picked up by dust storms, caused massive dust storms that swept across the entire nation. Most states suffered from droughts between the 20s and 30s. These dust storms were destructive. They destroyed all the a lot of the crops that were still surviving through that drought. And the only solution that farmers had was to produce more crops, buy more land and produce more crops. Well, the problem with this was this inflates wheat prices, which takes them deeper into the depression, because if they can't get money for their crops, then they're not going to have any money to survive off of. It's just their income is going to plummet. So it killed farmers' incomes, property value decreases, a lot of people start getting hopeless. It actually led to a lot of people committing suicide just because they didn't think that they would ever be able to get out of it. And it also killed a lot of people because of something called dust pneumonia. So basically fine little particles of dust get blown around in the air, and people inhale these and breathe these in all day because the dust is literally everywhere around them, and it kills them from the inside out. Older people and very young children were more susceptible to this, but it killed thousands of people across the Great Plains during this. Ultimately, the drought ended around the 1939 era, but what really brought the United States out of the Great Depression was the war. So once the Depression ended, it took a massive sacrifice for the United States. The United States was determined to stay out of it and hold their ground and maintain a neutral position on things. But when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, we could no longer stay neutral on things, and it ultimately brought us into that war. And with us joining this war, we had a depleted military that didn't really have a lot of men, so they opened up the draft and men started going to the draft. But when men started going overseas, they needed somebody to produce stuff for the war effort, which led women to working. So women began to work in industrial jobs, going out of the house than their standard housewife that they had typically been, and they'd gone out and made money and become independent people who can make money for their families too. So this is stimulating the economy. The men are getting paid, the women are getting paid, everybody's making money. So basically the increase in industry from the war and the war effort helped bring America out of the Great Depression. Thank you.